Welcome to another episode of Find Yourself in the Future. Today we'll hear from Eddy Shyu, AI Product Manager for Cisco Networking Academy and creator of NetAcad's popular Introduction to Modern AI and Apply AI courses. I'm curious to learn about his journey into AI, as well as his perspective on why you should develop AI skills no matter your career aspirations. Let's jump right in. Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. I am joined by Eddy Shyu, Business Product Manager for Learn with Cisco. Today we'll be chatting about Eddy's creation of popular Networking Academy courses like Intro to Modern AI or Apply AI, Update Your Resume, and also his thoughts on future trends in learning. Let's get started. Thank you so much for joining me today, Eddy. I would love to dive deeper into your career journey later in this conversation, but I first wanted to ask you how your career has evolved since you first started teaching different courses.
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Yasmin. So I've been at Cisco Networking Academy for about a year and a half, building courses about AI, how to use AI. And before that, I was at deeplearning.ai for about 5 years, building courses mainly serving engineers to help them learn how to build machine learning models and train them. So I guess my career evolution has sort of evolved with the AI landscape in that before I was very much focused on teaching like how do you learn the math and the code for how to train these models, first building the models and then cleaning the data so that you can then train those models to do some useful task. And since I joined Cisco Networking Academy, I've pivoted towards trying to serve the broader audience first and trying to build courses that show people how to use AI. Eventually, I'll build courses that also get more technical as well.
That's awesome. I think that's really cool. You kind of start at base level and then you grow over time. I feel like that's kind of how how AI has evolved in general. So it's really cool that your courses can stay up to date and change as the trends change. And now, kind of going in with that, since you started teaching both machine learning and AI, how would you say the AI landscape has changed and how it has affected how you teach or create your courses?
So yeah, I think my teaching has kind of evolved as the AI landscape has also changed. So before, for many years, in order to learn about AI and machine learning, you would first need to learn coding and some math so that you can learn how to build these models and then learn how to train them, clean the data and train these models. Now we have some really good models that are already pre-trained and that you can use, especially a lot of models you can use without writing code, in particular chatbots. So since I've joined Networking Academy, I've shifted my focus towards reaching the audience that isn't necessarily wanting to build and train models, but wants to learn how to use them effectively for their day-to-day tasks.
That's awesome. I know for myself as a learner new to AI, I can sometimes feel like overwhelmed or unsure by all the options that there are. Especially with where to start with AI. Where should I start? Where should I start learning? What would you say to somebody who feels like they're already behind?
I think right now, because the landscape is changing and AI is improving pretty rapidly, everyone feels behind in some sense, whether they've been doing this like maybe for a couple of months or whether they've been kind of in this field for many years. I feel overwhelmed with all the changes that are happening as well. But I think what we can do is to just be consistent in trying and experimenting a little bit at a time and learning something new every day. And so I think what that looks like is, start small, start with some personal task where it's not some work-related task, it's not something where it's dealing with a lot of sensitive data, but just think of some way that you might. A lot of times it's like, sometimes I can't remember that quote that I wanted to share with my students. And I realize I could just ask some vague question and share as much as I know. And then I realize I get a lot of useful information back. So just using it for your personal use so that this gives you a chance to experiment with like how you ask the question, how does that change what you get, and how much level of detail do you actually need to give to get good results. And also just exploring the possibility of like, when is this a good time to possibly ask a chatbot a question to help me out? what I realized is that whereas when the models, maybe even like a year and a half ago, maybe they were not as powerful, I might ask very detailed questions or give very clearly defined tasks to these chatbots to perform a specific task. Now I'm realizing that I'm using a lot more the chatbots for the high level brainstorming for initially starting a project, because they can also give me a lot of ideas that essentially it's an encyclopedic knowledge of human civilization's recorded knowledge, I guess. So I guess that's one thing, is just experiment every day, try something new every day. So another thing other than experimenting every day by yourself is trying to also share with your friends. So if you can find a group of friends that you can meet with once a week or once a month, you can share what you've experimented with and what new software you tried out or what you heard in the news. And then your friends can also share what they also have been experimenting with, or what they realized when they were trying some task, and kind of some hypotheses they have about what AI is good at, or maybe where you need to step in more. So I think that's maybe two pieces of advice I would give, is just try things out every day, and also I guess it's like words with friends. It's more fun with friends, so maybe AI with friends.
Given this shift from, machine learning to AI to building AI models to using them, we know the job market is changing. So, what skills would you say are becoming more valuable and which ones might be becoming less critical?
I think now that chatbots are getting really good at a lot of tasks, I think that our role is trying to understand, what are the models good at and what are they still needing some assistance with, so that we know where we are complementary to the chatbot that we're working with. So I think a lot of times that means that we are directing, we're kind of the human in the lead, so to speak, directing the chatbots and the LLMs on a particular task. And sometimes that also means stepping back from a particular train of thought or a particular way of approaching a problem, in case that might not lead to the optimal solution, and trying to think about the alternate paths that you might take. So then giving the right direction, and also, I guess, thinking more broadly about what possible directions you might take in order to perform a particular task. I think in a way, our role then becomes more of like a manager, managing and giving good direction to these chatbots and these LLMs, so that they can help us perform useful tasks. And then we sort of delegate a lot of those fine, smaller details, such as, for example, if you're editing a document, now we have really good tools that help you with the editing, so that you are less needing to focus on those kind of low-level spelling and grammar, those types of issues, and are able to think more high level about what is the content, what are the ideas that you want to get across. That I think is still really important for you to keep your brain on for that, because chatbots and LLMs, they'll definitely, if you ask them, write an essay about some book, then it'll write an essay, and it may not exactly be the ideas that you actually wanted to share. So keeping your brain on and giving good direction, and then giving very clear instructions to these chatbots and LLMs, I think that's kind of how our role has shifted. And then delegating a lot of those finer, small details to the LLMs where appropriate.
I love how you mentioned a few examples of different experiences that you've had in creating courses. And so I would like to dive deeper into a little bit how your career experiences have helped you create those courses. Um, so, can you tell us a little bit about your career journey more in detail and how your experience has shaped the way you design courses for, non-technical learners?
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of what I think about when I'm teaching is from my first experience teaching in an in-person classroom of about 25 students. Um, and a lot of times when I think about building the online courses, I think about what those students are really looking for in that in-person classroom experience. So I think half of the conversations my students had with me did not actually have to do with the topic that we were teaching, but we're kind of trying to understand, help them with their motivation and their confidence, self-confidence. So I try to build that into my courses when I can, of in terms of teaching, just gradually trying to build up from what the student might know to where we want them to be. But also, if you see the Introduction to Modern AI course, I have a couple videos that are focused on study tips and life lessons. And I feel like it's trying to share what I used to share when I was teaching in person. And then I also had some good mentors along the way. So my first time teaching online courses, I was at Udacity, and my first manager, his name is Luis Serrano. He later went on to kind of become a YouTube star. He founded his own Serrano Academy and is teaching a lot of machine learning topics online on YouTube. And when I first joined the company, I interviewed with him actually, and oh, actually I'll talk about that later. But when I first started my role and he was giving me advice on how to teach, he tried to, I think he told me that you want to start with kind of that nice non-technical analogy to kind of help people ease into some topic. And then afterwards you can go back and build on top of that and add that complexity, like the math or some of the technical details. And so I think what he was trying to get at was, don't worry about, sometimes maybe teachers might feel like they're afraid that they might teach something that's too simple or maybe too dumbed down. But for the most part, students appreciate if you kind of start gradually with that kind of nice storybook example, the non-technical analogy, and then it helps them to build on top of that when you start getting into more of the details. And then my next mentor at deeplearning.ai was Andrew Ng, who's kind of very well known for teaching his machine learning course at Stanford and then building lots of courses. Every time I worked with him and we were trying to make a decision on how to design a course, he would always ask us to think like, what is best for the learner? So what decision do we make that is actually going to be better for the learner? And my take on that is usually, what's best for the learner is usually going to be more work for the teacher. So just be prepared for that, to really be careful and explain thoroughly and give examples and really prove that what you're trying to teach is correct with like a real example.
I think that's awesome. And I totally agree with the sentiment of meeting the learner where they're at and kind of altering the course where you think the learner may, have the best experience. And so I kind of want to dive a little bit more deeper into your creation of Intro to Modern AI for Cisco Networking Academy. Intro to Modern AI has reached 432,000 class participants and is available in over 10 languages. What would you say you hope your audience walks away with when completing one of your courses?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had a lot of fun building that. It was the first time in a long time that I was actually teaching on camera. So for the many years before, I was kind of the director behind the scenes, and so it was kind of fun doing that again, where I would kind of be able to tell my jokes and use props and all those things. I think what I would hope the students will get from that is that they can now learn about AI by playing with these models, with these software, with these tools, and experimenting with them. And so what I tried to show them, from the computer vision examples to the translation and then to the LLM and chatbot sections, was that I would share with them some insight I had from using these tools in the past, but then I would try to demonstrate that to them in the video itself, and then encourage students to try things out for themselves. Learning is more than just learning new definitions. Learning is about getting that real experience by doing things and then observing what you see and then trying to draw some hypotheses or conclusions based on what you observe. So I hope that students, by seeing these examples that I try to demonstrate for them, also get interested in experimenting themselves when they step away, when they finish the course.
That's awesome. And in addition to those examples you gave, what else would you say makes your course series unique compared to other AI courses available online?
Yeah, part of it is maybe there's been a gradual shift, but when I first joined NetAcad, we actually, there was an ongoing project to build an intro course to machine learning and AI. That was much more kind of the bottom-up approach of teaching the math for regression and then teaching the coding to then build up to learning about machine learning and AI that way. And then when I joined about I guess 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, I kind of realized that I think in my previous courses, I was also doing that. We were really reaching that audience that was like, in order to learn this topic, you first need to learn math and coding. But I felt like there was a shift in that we really should try to reach people. They may or may not decide that maybe they do or do not want to learn the math and code later, but that shouldn't prevent them from learning about the concepts and being able to use these tools. So that was kind of the shift I made for Intro to Modern AI, and that I'm still using for the Apply AI series, which is we assume that the student is not necessarily ready to learn the coding and the math yet, but learning the concepts, the pictures, the diagrams of like what's working underneath the hood, so to speak, is helpful for them. And then learning how to kind of use these tools and getting advice on how to use them more effectively would still be useful for them. So I think that was one approach that I had that I think was a big shift from the courses I built, but also from a lot of the courses that are currently available. And then maybe in terms of the teaching style, I'm a bit different from a lot of teachers in that I sort of believe in that kind of just-in-time learning and the top-down approach of learning. There are also great teachers out there who really believe that you should learn those fundamentals like the math and the theory before working up to understanding. Like they believe you should have that deep understanding. And my belief is that I want to be able to first get people excited and interested in the topic and to know enough so that they can be excited enough and feel confident enough to go deeper if they choose to. So what I've done, even in my courses at deeplearning.ai, was trying to figure out like, how do we help the student do something cool as soon as possible, and then help them learn like, how did that work? And then optionally, if they want, we can go deeper into some of the technical details. But at least they can, even if they decide, oh, the technical details, I'm not ready for that just yet, I still have some concept that's useful for me. I think the third thing that I feel like is important to help the students, and I think is a feature, there's kind of this balance between, a lot of teachers will say like you need to have hands-on practice, like you need to do the quizzes and you need to have those actual hands-on practice to learn. And I agree that that's really important, but I also realize, so my former boss, Andrew Ring, he would describe a learner he was trying to reach would be someone who's busy and on a treadmill and they have 10 minutes to watch a couple of videos and learn some concepts. And I've also talked to people who are already working professionals who also can relate that, they're busy cooking and they want to learn a little bit, but they can't be really hands-on, but they still want to learn. So even though being hands-on is a great way to learn and there's probably no perfect substitute for that, the way I design my courses is that I try to record all that hands-on demonstrations in the videos themselves, so that for students who maybe their hands are not free to actually do things, or they don't have the time to kind of invest in some open-ended experiment, they can actually watch kind of a clean and edited version of me going through that process. And hopefully they can still learn a lot from that.
As a hands-on learner myself, I really appreciate your sentiment of not only getting the example for the learner, but showing them how to do it and then sending them on their way to do it themselves. And I feel like your courses are also not only known for that, but also for their fun and engaging characters and storytelling. Where would you say you find the inspiration for those creative elements?
Oh, yes. It's funny how I think the head of our organization, Par, when I met her for the first time at a conference, she looked at me and she said, "Did you let the cat out of the bag?" If you take Intro to Modern AI, the translation videos, you'll get that reference. I think ever since I had the opportunity to teach, I think when I was teaching in person, I would start out maybe the first 5 minutes of class trying to show some fun YouTube video or trying to share some story because I was trying to make sure my students would be awake to be able to watch the rest of the lecture. For some context, they were working professionals, they were learning data analytics. So after their busy workday, they were coming to learn from me in the late evenings. And I think part of it was like, when I was a kid, I actually did not think about wanting to be a scientist or an astronaut. Like I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write stories. And that was what I loved to do. And so I think it's kind of just me merging my inherent interest in storytelling and applying that to teaching, because in a way teaching is kind of trying to figure out how you tell the story in a way that someone can understand and learn something. And then pair that with my interest in machine learning. So.
One thing you mentioned is being in an in-person classroom. Well, with online learning, it's kind of maybe hard to match that same energy as being in person. How would you say you would bridge that gap, and how do you think about making courses accessible for learners who are on the go?
Yeah, it's true. I reflected a lot when I was building online courses, why for my first teaching experience, why students would, commute a long way, rush to a classroom and spend 2 hours in a classroom. And, a lot of it is like just being physically there with other students, being able to ask questions, and also being able to hear questions from other students. So what I've tried to do when I'm teaching online is to kind of imagine that I still have that student who's physically there asking me all those follow-up questions of like, but how does that work? Like sometimes I feel like when I'm building a course, I might get lazy and just be like, okay, and then this is generally what happens because I've had experiences that tell me, this is my hypothesis of the cause and effect. But then I imagine the student in the classroom asking me, but can you prove that? Like, show me a concrete example. And so then I redesign my courses to kind of assume that I got asked that question of like, okay, teacher, please prove what you just said. So that's part of it. Part of it is I realize that in class, you actually hear a student ask a question, and that also makes you reflect, before you get the answer and you're hearing your classmate ask a question, you'll also be thinking like, oh yeah, why is it that way? What could be the possible solution to this? And so in the narrative style of when I'm teaching, I will also try to kind of teach, instead of just like saying all these things, I'll also ask that question of like, and you may wonder why these models, for example, why is this model good at understanding images, but is struggling with creating images? And the answer would be, oh, actually, they're two different models. The chatbot has an LLM that's in understanding the model, understanding images, and then it's actually using a separate dedicated image generation model to create images. Yeah, so I think that would be the main thing, is trying as much as possible to imagine what it is that students really value from that in-person classroom. And then I think maybe I touched on this earlier, but because in the in-person environment, so much of the conversations my students had with me were them asking me like, do you think I can do this? Do you think I can get a job? Do you think I can learn this? And so a lot of it was about confidence building. So that's why, at least in Intro to Modern AI, I build in those, I call them motivational videos, to kind of talk about those things that you normally would get from a teacher in class, but maybe you might not see in typical online courses.
I agree, and I think words of encouragement go a long way. And I know for myself taking the course, you get so used to, what you need to learn, what you need to take notes on. And the moments where, you bring the learner back to reality and you say, here's a check-in and let's touch base and see what we know before we move on to the next thing. I think that's really powerful. And at least for me, it very much mimics the effect of being in person. And I think as much as your courses could be taken, let's say, on the go, I think with those interactive elements, they're just as great for sitting down at your desk and focusing and getting that specific experience with the chatbots. So I think that's a really interesting part of your courses.
Oh, right. Yeah, I should also touch on, even though I was trying to make the course, I guess, digestible as a Netflix style, like just passively watching videos, it is true that there are practice, like there will be text after each video that tells you like, okay, here's how you can practice this yourself. And then if you take the Apply AI courses, I took some feedback from the students from the earlier course, and I actually give them the downloadable attachments, so you really will be able to practice everything that you see in the videos if you would like to.
At least for me as a learner, I really benefit from reading the directions and hearing the directions. And so having both of those laid out in front of me was really awesome to then go to my own chatbot and ask my own questions and then become familiar with how to prompt and how to ask the right thing the right way.
Cool. Glad you liked it. Thanks for taking the course.
Can you now share a memorable moment or piece of feedback from a student that really stuck with you? I know you mentioned getting feedback from students and kind of keeping up with them and seeing how they like the courses, but has there been any specific moment or feedback that you received that has really made a difference for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, every time I launch a course for the next couple months, every day I'm actually reading all the student feedback. So for all the students, like if you write feedback, I'm probably reading it. I think a lot of the comments that I really appreciate is that the students who watch some of the videos from the study tips and life lessons sections, they comment on how I think they appreciate what I'm trying, what kind of advice I'm trying to give them, that I think goes beyond just learning the course material. For example, one thing that I personally feel like has been an important life lesson for me was the idea of, instead of trying to be really good at one thing, you can be, pretty good at a couple things. And if you package those, couple skills together, it makes you very unique. So personally for me, for example, I loved, writing, wanted to be a writer. I probably wouldn't, be such a good writer that I could like work for Disney and write scripts for movies, but I love doing it. And I also love learning about machine learning and AI. I'm probably not going to be like a machine learning researcher, but I think when I combine kind of my interest in telling stories and interest in some particular topic, that made me unique in a way. And I hope that students can discover their way of being unique as well. Not just by, for example, being the fastest 100-meter dash runner, but maybe the fastest 100-meter dash runner who can also juggle 3 eggs in the air at the same time, right? So in terms of specific feedback, there's one where the student said that this teacher deserves a raise. And I love that quote.
And as somebody who has taken your courses, I personally would like to know, what was your favorite part of creating them? Do you have a specific aspect to it that, was really memorable for you or something that you really enjoy about making them?
Yeah, I guess because it was the first time in like 5 years that I was teaching on camera, I had all these ideas in my head of different, relevant but funny stories I wanted to tell at the start of each video to kind of get the student, convince them like, okay, it's worth trying to watch the rest of the lecture. And so I actually drove up from LA to San Jose to find some office space to film it in. Was actually able to work with 2 video producers that I also worked with at deeplearning.ai, so they helped film for me. One of them even actually took me up to the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge because I wanted to get some footage from there. And it was one of those lucky days when you didn't have any clouds. That's kind of rare for San Francisco. And then one of my new teammates at the time, Muffy, was also there. She was actually moving I have an orange puppet dog from my childhood. She was actually the puppeteer for that, and also helping me out with getting a lot of props. So I think personally that was a lot of fun to be able to kind of try to make the videos interesting, with the goal of making them interesting wasn't just to tell jokes, but to help the student learn some concept, some analogy that would help them carry them through that rest of that lecture.
We've mentioned your audience a few times, and we were actually able to reach out to them and see different questions that they would like to ask you. And so, our audience would like to know, in your opinion, what is a realistic and practical approach to studying AI technologies, and maybe more broadly to staying current with new and unfamiliar technologies.
Yeah, for me, when I first got started, I was taking lots of online courses. because I also had a budget. Like I looked at some, graduate programs, like official programs, and I realized like, I have a small budget, so I'm gonna take as many online courses as I can. And I actually spent a year and a half just studying online courses on Coursera and Udacity, which was kind of funny because in the end I ended up working for Udacity and also building courses at deeplearning.ai, which are put on Coursera. But I think that's one thing that I think is still really valuable, to get a lot of the current information from subject matter experts. And then something that I would like to do, I would have liked to have done more when I was studying by myself, was like finding other people who are also interested in the same topic, so that I could meet with them and share, what I'm excited about, what did I experiment with this week, and also hear from them, what they tried out, something, some new tool, some new application, or some new way of doing a task with a chatbot. So yeah, I guess those two things are like, get those official resources from online courses like Networking Academy, but there's also a lot of other online course resources. And then trying to find other people who, are also wanting to learn, so that you can kind of lift each other up together.
That's awesome. I think not only is it about going out there and seeing what you can learn, but also interacting with other learners and having community. And I think that's the best way to find, the little hidden gems of what there is to learn that you might not know exists, especially maybe specific courses that are staying up to date with different technologies, and maybe even explaining them in a better and more accessible way. I know I personally benefit from, especially in your courses where you reach the learner and you not only simplify but give examples. And so I think that's the best way to stay up to date with technologies, is try to learn them in the way that makes the best sense to you. I think sometimes it can be like very confusing because all these big words and different things you've never heard of, but there's a lot of resources out there to help you understand. Our audience would also like to know, what would you say are some small, practical, specific baby steps that someone can take today to start building those real AI skills?
Trying to get involved with some volunteer activities. So open source projects, people have always recommended that as a way of getting kind of real world experience, because oftentimes open source projects, people who are employees of a company may be supporting some open source project, and so volunteers are also contributing to that. And just from my personal experience, when I was at deeplearning.ai, I started a volunteer community to have alpha testers give feedback on course content before launch. And what ended up happening, and what I was kind of hoping for, was a lot of those really active volunteers kind of bubbled up and became very active participants. So much to the point that I went to my boss, Andrew, and asked him, can I have a budget, please, to like pay these people so that they keep helping us. And so a lot of the team that I built up at deeplearning.ai actually came from volunteers who were just so helpful that I really wanted to hire them. So I do think that's a way that people can get started. I would like to point out that I had a student point out to me this story. They were saying, well, if you do it for free, then won't they just always ask you to do it for free? And like, why would they pay you if you're already doing it for free? So I think that's a very fair question to ask, to kind of, whenever you're volunteering, you want to make sure that the tasks that you're doing are building up your skills as well. So they're not just tasks that are need to get done because the company or some project needs it, right? When you're volunteering, these tasks should serve a dual purpose. They should help that organization or that open source project, but they should also help you build up your skills. And so if they're not building up your skills and you feel like it's just work, then try to find those tasks that you feel are actually helping you learn as well. And when you're really, really good at something, then people will want to pay you to keep doing it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Find Yourself in the Future, and we'll catch you in the next one.